All right. Good afternoon, everyone. It is 1 o'clock, and I am sure that we'll have other folks joining us here in the next few minutes. But because of time, and we want to make sure that we give Chris and Kelby enough time to present to us today. My name is John Sermontello. I'm one of the zone representatives for Actia's Board of Directors from Genesee Valley BOCES. And I'm the director of programs here. So welcome, everyone. Glad to have you on. And I have the pleasure of ensuring high quality and rigorous curriculum for CTE programs on Atlas. And I have Chris Guthrie with us, as well as his counterpart, Kelby Zenner, who will be presenting to all of you today. And so I welcome them, welcome you, and there is no commercial. So we don't have any commercials today, and you two can take it off.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, John. And if it's okay, I might share my screen. I've got a PowerPoint and a screen over here. Let's see.
There you go.
Working. Let me. All right. How's that for everybody? Can everybody see that? All right. Thanks for the introduction. We're both really happy to be here. It's really exciting to get to connect with educators and kind of hear from them, as well as talk about some of the other things going on. Like John said, I'm Chris Guthrie. I sort of lead our account management team. So for any of you who have Atlas within your BOCES or within your districts or schools, you probably work with and hear from my team quite a bit. A lot of us are former educators. I'm a former educator myself. And so we're coming in it from a background of how do we support our schools, our BOCES, our districts in being as successful as possible with whatever their curriculum goals or initiatives might be. And then of course, there's the Atlas software that is there to help bolster that success. And I'm joined by my colleague, Kelby Zenner.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having us. I, like Chris, a former educator, and really support our professional development side, as well as welcoming new clients into our fold in terms of Atlas. We're excited to just chat with you and talk a little bit about what we're seeing with schools as they develop their curriculum. You might all have ideas of how you ensure quality curriculum at your districts or schools, and we would love to hear from you as we're going. Today's webinar, or this session, is open. So if you're like, gosh, I have an idea or a question, unmute yourself, ask away. Chris and I love questions throughout, so don't hesitate to ask. We really want this to be much more of a conversation than just the two of us up here chatting away. So make sure that as questions come up or examples come up that you have, don't hesitate to share that with us.
Yeah. And in addition to the conversation today, we've only got about an hour, so we do have our contact information at the end. So whether you use Atlas and this sparked something for you and you're interested in kind of diving deeper or continuing on with the conversation there, you'll be able to get in touch with us. Or if you see the session today and you say, well, I'm kind of curious, would Atlas work for us, or would it be the right fit? Then we could reach out, set up a conversation, hear from you about your goals, and kind of show you a little bit more of the actual tool and system. Before we started today, we were kind of chatting with John and really kind of talking about how exciting this time is in CTE and how there's a real renaissance going on in the ways that we think about career and technical education, and the way we engage our learners in that process, and the way we support our teachers and instructors in that process as well. So we'll touch upon some of the new exciting things that are going on, as well as the tools that are there to help support success in those areas. So we'll start with just sort of a really brief kind of, what are we talking about when we're talking about curriculum, right? Just kind of getting those common definitions so we're in the same starting place. Some unique considerations for curriculum within CTE, and really that's unique opportunities for connecting our learners within our CTE programs with kind of core curriculum at their home school, or whatever they might be doing in those sort of quote unquote traditional academic subject areas. And then what you can do about sort of sharing that CTE curriculum with the broader community, what options exist, why you might do that. We'll hop into Atlas very briefly, again, just kind of more to showcase some high level pieces. And then the last bit there is, again, kind of our contact information, as well as our PD sites if you wanted to browse some of the other offerings that we have. But before we start just thinking about what curriculum is, what it isn't, what are some of the terms we'll use, Curriculum, as we think about it, is the noun. It is the what is being taught. It's the resources, it's the handouts, it's the textbook, it's the presentations, it's the standards, it's sort of the what, the noun of that instruction. Curriculum mapping is a process. So that's taking that written curriculum, taking those sources, those resources, pulling them together, writing, analyzing, reviewing, reflecting, making revisions on that curriculum. It's pulling in new initiatives into how that curriculum actually gets delivered to the students. And Atlas is really just the tool to help facilitate that. So just so that we're on the same page with kind of what we're talking about there, anything you'd add, Kelby, in terms of when we think about curriculum and how we conceptualize it?
I think that one of the important pieces here is that action piece. The piece that we're really honing in on is that our curriculum might adapt and change over time based on our student body that we have, based on the experience level of our students. I'll tell you, a lot of schools that maybe were remote last year or the year before have adjusted quite a bit in terms of what their curriculum looks like, as some of those skills, maybe those hands-on skills, weren't quite learned in the years before. So giving them that opportunity to scaffold. But when we really think about this, we really want to focus in on the fact that this is a process, and it is about really being reflective about where we are, where our curriculum is, and making sure that no matter what happens in terms of the curriculum we follow, the standards we follow, what gets taught, is going to be pretty consistent from year to year, because that's our established curriculum that we're working on within that curriculum mapping sphere.
Yeah. And I think that's a great way to put it, that this is a process, and not only is it a process, but it's an ongoing process. There's really never an end to that curriculum work, because like Kelby said, our students are different each year. So what we try to do with our partner schools, partner districts, and BOCES is to help them to support a really sustainable process that can progress and change and adapt over the course of their curriculum journey or the years that they use Atlas. So there's nothing static about it. We don't want any of this to be a binder that sits on a shelf and collects dust. We want it to be active and living and breathing.
So out of curiosity, I'm gonna pose a question. I'd love everybody to answer in the chat. And 5 being like, gosh, we've got our documented curriculum. We feel really comfortable with the process. We feel really good. That's a 5. A 0 is like, oh my gosh, I know we have curriculum. I have no idea where it is. But it's something we're really looking forward to working on. And then in the middle somewhere, you might fall. So where do you feel you are as a school or a BOCES, excuse me, that's joining? So Nicole, you're feeling really good. I love it. Lisa, you're right there at a 4.
Yeah.
John at a 4. Great.
Very cool.
So feeling really confident. Don't be shy if you're like, gosh, I'm actually a 1 or a 2. That's okay. It's all good. This is why we're here to talk about it.
And wherever anybody is, I think that the idea of that we're going to talk about today, some of the concepts and ideas are going to be relevant no matter where on that kind of spectrum and that journey you are. Because like we said, it's an ongoing process. So even if things are really solid, there's always improvements that can be made. And if you're at the beginning of the journey, it's really nice to have colleagues and people you trust who've done it before, who you can kind of ask them how it went or advice that they have as well. So hopefully, again, this community of conversation continues outward from just the one session today.
Thanks for sharing over there.
All right, this is a lot of text, but all this is here to just kind of bolster the fact that when we talk about curriculum within CTE, there is no reason to think that that curriculum is any less rigorous or any less connected to interdisciplinary skills or non-academic skills than the curriculum that might be occurring in more traditional academic subject areas like English, math, and science, and so forth. So when Kelby and I have had the opportunities to work with specific CTE educators or programs, as we do kind of all around the world, but really a lot on the East Coast and quite a bit in the West as well. There are a number of districts that we work with, especially in Utah, with really rigorous programs for their CTE. I know all the Actia BOCES and districts that fall under that have really awesome, really high quality curriculum. And it is rigorous, it passes muster. But when we think about this, we also know that we have some of the educators that are coming from the industry maybe, and they didn't go through the same teaching programs or have the same educational background. So we also want to make sure that we are supporting those who will be writing the curriculum, reviewing the curriculum, using the curriculum to better understand what some of the concepts are. Now, whether they call them essential questions or enduring understandings, whether we use the same buzzwords in kind of traditional curriculum mapping, maybe doesn't matter as much as understanding the concepts and understanding the purpose. So while we have really strong examples of written CTE curriculum and documented curriculum, we also want to make sure that those that are developing it at a classroom level and delivering it to learners also really have a strong underpinning and understanding of it. And that's a lot of the work that we do, is just making sure that every stakeholder is empowered in this process. Anything you might add there, Kelby?
No, I think that's a really important piece because everyone comes at it from different ways. I know that any school that we work with, depending on who's writing the curriculum, understanding their comfort level for what is expected so that we all feel confident about what we're doing. I posed a question in the chat. Feel free to answer if you want. I'm curious as who's currently responsible for writing your curriculum. I know a lot of schools have curriculum writing teams that write it. And then as an individual teacher, I might inherit that and use it. Sometimes teachers are responsible, like John is sharing over there. So who's really responsible for really thinking through that curriculum and the flow and the scope and sequence of the learning that happens?
Yeah. And there are different tools as we get into Atlas later on. There are different tools to support different curriculum writing structures. So if it is something that is written more at a committee level, but then teachers are adapting slightly at more the learning experience or lesson level, there are ways to take that consensus curriculum or that agreed upon curriculum and then be able to deliver that and still document at more of a discrete learning experience level. Oops. Unique considerations when we're talking about curriculum within CTE. Kelby, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about graphic here.
Yeah, so I think this is really where how you think about your courses and how they align and how they grow and build upon one another is a really key part of having a rigorous curriculum. So when we talk about and go back to this, it's really about how do we scaffold from one level to another? How does that look over time? And really saying what is the most important flow for a student to go through in terms of a particular career path or area that they are focused on. So really thinking about how do your courses, how are they lined up? And not all courses are a full year. Some courses are a half year. Some courses are 2 courses. I know my daughter is in a CTE class and it's 2 periods every day, not just 1, because of the type of course that it is. And so, what does that look like when we have more time dedicated to the learning that's going on than, say, other classes that we might be looking at? So this is really where you step back and say, what does that structure and overall structure look like for our program of study?
Yeah, and providing visibility as well for whether it's the CTE instructor and teacher kind of having visibility about what their students might be doing in some of their other core subject areas and the ways that connects in with that scaffolding and that progression. But without the visibility, without the data at your fingertips of your colleagues within the schools or within the districts, it's really hard to understand where some of those cross connections might occur.
So when we think about our curriculum, really, when we step back, I think this is one of the most important pieces. And I would say anyone with Atlas or without, it is always good to do a check-in and say, when we're thinking about what we're capturing, is this what's essential? So, some of our schools say, what of what we're teaching usually comes from somewhere from our standards, somewhere from how we establish what the common understandings or the common learning targets are. It also might have to do with some tiered vocabulary or bringing in the different vocab that is necessary in order to be successful within a course. And then we see a lot of schools start to articulate between CTE skills and core academic skills. So I've noticed, John and Lisa, thank you both for sharing over there. As you think about how mapping occurs, I have some curiosities. We see it in two real ways when we talk about that what. We see academic and CTE teachers collaborating and mapping together in some cases in a very robust, holistic way. And sometimes we have CTE curriculum going on alongside maybe some core content like English or history, but they're not overlapping within the same course. So there's different ways to think about how schools map their curriculum or how schools document their curriculum. But one of the key pieces is to really clearly articulate the what. What do we want to capture? What's essential? What's important? What do we want to see from course to course? And then the other part that we typically see is how does that happen? And that usually falls within the types of assessments we give and the learning plan that's going on. So one of the things I would really, really encourage anyone that's thinking about documenting their curriculum, if you use a Google Doc for a template or you use Atlas as your template, reflect on that and say, are we capturing what's essential? Are we capturing what we really want to talk about in terms of our curriculum? And is it written in a way that it is in the same language that we use on a day-to-day basis with our teachers? Yeah. And so as we show a couple examples, we can talk through that just a little bit, but I think this what we want to capture and how we're going to show learning are two parts of a template that we typically see within CTE to help really articulate that student learning journey.
Yeah, and I think when we think about that as a student journey, whether that student is in my class as a mechanics course, or whether they're in Kelby's course as a biology course, or the art teacher's course, we as instructors, as teachers, we're thinking very specifically about our classroom, our resources, our learning targets. But that student journey is not isolated to those silos. So being able to help make those connections, or at least facilitate conversation around those connections, is only going to further embed that learning for the student and benefit them across all those subject areas. So it's no surprise. Oh, let's see. Sorry. So when we think about, sorry, I'm skipping ahead a little bit. When we think about those the standards that are used that Kelby's talking about in that what, there are numerous different sets of standards out there. I know for some of the Actia, some of the BOCES were using NOCTI and are now moving to precision exams. There are others that are using the NACER and so forth. There are lots of different sets of standards that come with the CTE programs out there. All of those are in our databases. We can make those available. Certainly if there's a new set or there's subject areas that you're interested in learning about, we can make those available. We also have other sets of standards on more the kind of core curriculum areas, Common Core, Next Gen Science, other kind of non-subject specific, like the Cloud Institute for Sustainability. So if there are elements of your curriculum within that what that you're saying, these are the essential elements, these are what we need to track and make sure we're progressing through, we want to make sure that those connections are explicit for those who are writing the curriculum, and then available for analyzing and looking for any gaps in repetition. So using some of the tools, we'll jump into Atlas and just kind of, again, show those for a second, but using some of the analytics and the reporting tools to make sure that we have the coverage that we need.
And I think this is also where you want to step back and say, are there additional things? So we might have our CTE standards. Lisa, excuse me, if you're talking about mapping academic and CTE together, we might want to pull out standards in different ways. We might want to say, hey, these are our CTE standards, here are our core academic standards. And we're going to talk about different ways schools do that. Or if you have safety standards that everyone has to hit at some point, that might be a different way to capture that information. But if you go back to really saying, and you know what, when we work with schools, I actually would have the conversation of saying, define your what you want to what you want to capture. Without even looking at your template. And then let's go look at your template, or look at how you currently capture it and say, does it capture what you really want to see in terms of your curriculum?
Yeah, absolutely. And then in terms of looking at the process of those standards and aligning to those standards, we want to make sure that we're supporting any transition. So for example, with the NACER Electric, we had a 2008 version that came out. And then in 2020, there was a new version of those standards. Now they're locked together in terms of the modules. So there's a connectivity between those two modules. Between those two modules there. So if in our curriculum in Atlas, we've already gone through and we've identified in our electrical courses, we've checked off which standards are being taught where, and we have that scaffolding. Now, when the new standards come out, there are reports and tools that you can use to help guide that alignment to the new standards so that your team can go through a curriculum review process and not just kind of plug and play where those standards once were, but actually take into consideration what's different about these standards, what really changed, what was updated, and what does that mean for our instruction and how we change our instruction, right? We don't want a new set of standards to just basically come in and we still teach it the exact same way we did before. There's a reason why that new set was released and why revisions were made, new content was added. So we want to make sure that again, ongoing sustainable process is embedded in with our cadence and how we interact with the curriculum. This is going to be no surprise for anybody in here. You probably live and breathe this type of data, and there's just 3 studies there, but there's a lot more out there in the ways that CTE can really help bolster and encourage and support learning in those other subject areas. So whether that's looking at STEAM, whether that's looking at literacy, the ways that those can be embedded in is really important. And Kelby and I were talking beforehand. We've got a conference, a CTE conference that's going to be here in Oregon in April. And we actually have one of our PD members presenting a session around pulling in literacy and language acquisition and language learning into CTE programs and how that can be embedded in. So there's a lot of opportunities there. And so what we want to make sure that we are supporting our schools and districts and BOCES in is not missing those opportunities, but really trying to leverage those opportunities so that our students come out of our program, come out with their degree, whatever that might be, really successful, and that they've really had the opportunity to engage in all different segments and sectors of learning. One thing for a lot of our districts that have written something like a portrait of a graduate or kind of the graduate profile is thinking about how that's also embedded in and a part of the conversation with CTE. So it's not just the homeroom or it's not just the ELA courses, but it is CTE that is really contributing to the building of that portrait of a graduate. So one way we do that specifically in Atlas is if we've got our template, and for those who have Atlas, this will look somewhat familiar, where you've got a category where in the unit plan, you're actually picking up and choosing which standards you're teaching. You can actually start to flag those at a unit level and say, within these, in this example, within these electrical standards here within the various modules, these are standards that I am also connecting back to mathematical practices or to literacy connections and trying to make that explicit within the map. And then we can take this data and run some really cool reports where we can look at specific subject areas, specific courses, and see where those connections are between the other strands and subject areas. Anything
this is also again, it doesn't matter if you do it in Atlas or if you do it outside of Atlas. I think the idea of articulating the standards and where they fit in terms of the learning, whether it is you're really focused on language connections or math connections, or you're really focused on social emotional connections and bringing that into CT. There's so many ways you could look at this, but I think by being really thoughtful about when we map our curriculum, we're saying what role do these standards have in the curriculum that we're creating? Yeah. And to step back and be reflective on that part, I think can be really helpful in creating really strong units of instruction that tie back to those standards in the way that we envision them being the foundation for a piece of learning or a time period of learning for our students.
Yeah, definitely.
Let's pause here real quick. Any questions? I know we're kind of going through having some good conversations over there. You know, Lisa's asking about standards. That was good. But are there any questions that are percolating, or thoughts that are percolating as you think about the curriculum that you have your teachers capture?
Anything looking familiar, anything looking very different, and people have other ideas? Or, you know, Kelby and I love to hear some challenges too sometimes. So if you're looking at this and you say, hey, you know, we have a very different way of doing it, we love to expand the way we conceptualize this stuff too. So feel free to throw that in.
If not, we'll just keep going.
Sounds good.
Feel free to share. You can share a lot of ways. So here's when we start thinking about curriculum that we get really excited. It's really about the process of unpacking. And I think this is where, when you work with teachers on curriculum, doesn't matter what teacher it is, we work with all you know, folks that have been in industry and then moved into education, or have been lifelong educators. It's the process of taking this time to select our standards, back to what Chris said, and then really unpacking it into core content and skills, if that's what we say is important in terms of our curriculum. And you might even throw in a guiding question or an essential question to get students thinking. So, you know, this is actually pulled from one of our schools in Utah that we work with. That's a CTE school. So this idea of, if we're working with students, really getting them to think about what it is that they're learning. Why is suspension work sometimes considered the easiest money in the profession? Get them thinking about what does this have to do with the fact that I'm going to be able to inspect and replace bumpers, or inspect the track bar. So these are the skills I'm going to walk away with. But I'm going to be thinking about, well, why is this the easiest money? What does it have to do? And so thinking about how we really engage with our students in terms of the curriculum can be really, really important, and really being thoughtful. If essential questions aren't something that your teachers use in their classroom on a day-to-day, then obviously it's not something we want to capture with our curriculum. So when we go back to that idea of what is a rigorous curriculum, we really want to make sure we've really thought through what is it that's critical that we capture, so that it's something that gets used on a day-to-day basis as teachers are teaching within their classrooms.
And that's
sorry, go ahead, Chris.
That's a really important point, Kelby. If we know through our building of our curriculum that we have those essential elements addressed, and that they scaffold in the way that we intend to, and they have those connections, it's almost like we've got our blueprint and our plan, so that when we're actually in the classroom and we have to deal with all the numerous things that come up in a classroom setting, and we're really there to instill and to be a catalyst for that student learning and inspire them, we're not focused and thinking about all the list of standards and so forth that our program requires us to hit. We're focused on those learning activities and learning experiences and inspiring our students, because we have a strong confidence that all of the things that we're teaching there connect back to this other plan. The time, if you were going to take a road trip or a long distance bicycle trip, the time to do the tune-ups and to oil your chain, or to check the tire pressure and to get everything packed up and to know your route, is not when you're out on the road already, right? There might be some need to self-correct and to make some changes as you're out on the road, but you do all that beforehand, so that when you're on the road, you're focused on that experience. Sounds like something might be ringing. There we go. Cool. All right.
And so, you know, a lot of our schools that we work with, when they think about their skills, they think about it in two different ways. You can do the same with content, but you might see yourself starting to capture CTE skills, what are specific to the learning that's going on for the CTE program, and academic skills that are very specific to core content areas, back to our standards and articulating what those standards are used for. Unpacking them into those clear types of skills can be really helpful, and can sometimes help make that connection. Or if we're working in a collaborative environment in which the academic teachers are also working with the CTE teachers in terms of working together to write curriculum, this is where, you know, as I think through the CTE skills, I can sit with my literacy teacher and we can write those literacy skills that we're also asking our students to be able to do. So, you know, I think, and you know what I also think in CTE is really that I don't see pulled out a ton in the curriculum, but I think would be really interesting are the soft skills that get learned. And I think so many parts of our programs are teaching such amazing soft skills that students will use in such a variety of ways going forward. Pulling those directly out and saying, hey, we're teaching them how to have a conversation. Oh, my daughter's in cosmetology. For her final, I got a pedicure and a manicure, but she had to treat me just like she would if she was working in a salon. And, it was really, those are skills that she's walking away that she can use anywhere after she takes her class. And so I think that there's so many pieces that happen within that curriculum that it's important to capture some of those. I think soft skills are kind of that hidden skill that doesn't get clearly articulated sometimes, but can be really powerful in looking at how we're growing students as humans.
Yeah, and that's where that alignment to things like the portrait of a graduate or some of the other elements that might be written more specifically at a school or a district level come into play. So I know for one of the CTE districts we work with, one of the major emphasis points for their CTE work is how you build resilience in student learning and how you build problem solving and creative solutions, because that is across the board in any CTE program. Those are huge elements, and those are skills that connect back into the district's portrait of a graduate. And what they found by aligning was their CTE program actually had more explicit connections to some of those types of portrait of graduate soft skills than some of their other more traditional academic subject areas. So in CTE, students were getting exposed to really great opportunities for practicing that perseverance, for practicing problem solving that wasn't as rich in some of the curriculum in other areas. So it was the CTE program driving some changes within the traditional academic program, which was really cool to see. All right.
I'm curious, for those of you out there, as you think through your curriculum, I'm just going to keep asking you questions. Feel free to answer in the chat or unmute yourself. I like it to be a conversation. As you think about it, we're talking about, there's core CTE skills, there's academic skills. Do you look at maybe some of those soft skills or those problem solving skills as key components of your curriculum?
That's a great question.
I think that we do. For Area 2, what we do is that is in the employability profile, and it is gone over with the students by semester, so every 20 weeks, and reviewed, and especially at the end of the junior year, and then at the end of the senior year, and we also send those back, a copy of that back to the component districts that we serve, and they kind of like those because it really covers a lot of things in that employability profile, which includes soft skills.
Yeah, does that get documented in your curriculum as well?
That's something that we're going to revisit and put in, and we do use Atlas. And I think we have so many new people coming in. I think you're going to see next year a emphasis on the updating of those curriculums in the Atlas of all the information that's derived from the advisory board's information. So for myself, I'm going to have 40% new CT teachers in here. So they're going to be allowed to emphasize, what's new and improved and bring into the program along with their advisory council members here as we start that process. But that's our intent.
Wow.
That's great. I think there's some really cool ways to pull that in. And I think those are the things when you talk about the what's important, really saying, employability skills are one of our critical factors. Thanks for sharing, Paul.
Yeah. Well, and another thing that Paul brought up too is with new teachers coming in or with transition and staffing and so forth, we know whether it's education or anything, people are moving jobs all over the place, right? So being able to come in as an educator and have something to start with, even if that then becomes a template for rebuilding or reviewing or revising the curriculum, but having that documentation there when you come in as a new educator is a huge boon. I had an experience when I was teaching of coming in and it was sort of like, well, there might be a curriculum somewhere. Good luck finding it in the teacher's lounge office. And it was like, wow, that didn't set me up for success. So making sure that we're supporting, again, those educators coming in so that if we do have no staff, we want to facilitate their expertise coming in and influencing and growing and changing and revising the curriculum, but having something to start with is really quite powerful.
Anyone have another example, kind of like Paul's example of employability skills that they are thinking about in terms of their curriculum? You feel free to chat it or unmute. Love to hear your voices. Or does it get you thinking about anything?
Cool. Kelby, you want to talk about the agricultural? Should I skip to the next one?
No, we can. So like this is, we're just going to do a couple examples. So,
Yeah.
but feel free, share over there. Let others hear. I think it's helpful to hear what others are doing. This is just a quick example. Lots of different ways we can look at our curriculum. I'm just going to show you a couple quick ones. So Chris is just going to go to the next slide, which shows part of a template in Atlas that has our content, CTE, and academic skills. One thing that's unique when you think about how you document your curriculum, I will say this, wherever you do it, what are the important pieces or subsets of that curriculum? So here we're looking at agriculture, and as we unpack the agricultural curriculum here, we're looking at chemistry, biochemistry, and energy and life. So being really explicit in what are those areas in which the content is being taught. And then we can look at what are the specific skills designated for CTE, specific ones for academic. So really kind of, thinking through how do we organize our curriculum so that as we look at it, we can easily find what are those different areas of content that we're teaching can be really helpful. Can be pulled from your standards, cannot be. Here's one for perfect. Emergency medical response. If we're looking at airway management, we might be looking at, a little bit different. Instead of chemistry and biochemistry, we're looking at airway and ventilation, airway management, emergency oxygen. And in here are the key things that I'm teaching as a teacher. And then we have our CTE skills and academic skills. For any of your schools that are proficiency-based grading, or you're looking at proficiency as our standards-based grading as part of your component, thinking about how do those standards-based grades pull out into our skills, because those are coming from our standards. And so as we assess our students, we should clearly be able to see that link between the standard, the skills that we're asking our students to be able to do, and that standards-based report card that we might be turning out at the end of the term or the year for that student. So for those that might have proficiency-based or standards-based grading going on or being started in your district, I know there's a movement there. How you make those connections from one to the other is really important as well.
And especially when we're talking about CTE, where there are so many different sets of standards, and many of them are authored within the industry and then kind of go through a review. So there are some inconsistencies in kind of the design or the way that those are organized. But we know that many times a standard itself is such a large overarching target that being able to break that out and to sort of unpack that into these content and skill areas is necessary when we think about how we actually instruct. Oftentimes a standard in and of itself is too much for one single lesson or learning activity. We have to break that out. So if we are using those standards for standards-based grading, we know that the instruction that gets us to success there is going to have to be more complex than just teaching that standard outright. And so that's where really that thought work of breaking those out and thinking about the connections can be really powerful, whether you come from an educational kind of curriculum design background or whether you're coming from industry. It's going to be helpful in the success of the learners in the classroom. And then that kind of brings us to the point of, well, we've got this curriculum and we're proud of this curriculum, wherever it is, however we've done it. Whether Kelby said, like, we've done it on Google Docs or even old school on paper and pencil or something like that. We've got this curriculum. What do we do with it besides the instruction? What's the value? And I think there's a real push now that we're seeing to make that curriculum accessible and transparent beyond just the school setting or the district setting. So 5 reasons why you might share that curriculum out is to provide that transparency for the broader community. So for some of you, the structure is you've got CTE centers where students are going from their home school into the CTE center. Some of you have CTE programs embedded within those schools, but if you're in any of those situations, having that visibility or being able to share what's going on within CTE programs with the home schools, also being able to share and showcase that to industry partners. I know a lot of the work that CTE administrators are doing is trying to build and network their industry connections within the community. So being able to share that out and kind of show them what you're teaching is going to be really important. That kind of also goes back to what Paul was saying with that employability program, sharing some of those progressions of the students with their home school, and that being really valuable information to share with them. Also being able to engage parents and students outside of just the classroom. So if I'm a parent and I can see kind of what my student is doing in the classroom, I can have different conversations with them to ask them questions to help embed that learning beyond just the school day. Obviously, a lot of these programs go through approval and then reapproval. So being able to document and provide that evidence for accreditation. As a recruitment tool for teachers, if you're working with industry folks and you're trying to kind of bring them in as educators or entice them in, being able to show them what resources you have available. And then for students too, Kelby brought up the really interesting point of how do we prime or get our students in middle school interested and involved in maybe taking CTE courses in middle school, but then really just also getting them interested so that when they hit high school, they've already got sort of a hunger for getting into some of these CTE programs, almost like an online course catalog where they can go in and see, okay, cool, like I didn't really know what might be involved in this pre-EMT course, but now I can kind of see the different areas, like that looks good to me, I'm really interested in learning more about this. And then also just being proud of the curriculum. So one of the ways that we can do that for those of you who use Atlas is there is a public site version. Many of you already have this. It's something you can post on your website. It's something you can share. But basically, it is a version of your Atlas curriculum that you choose to share outwardly with that community. And you get to choose what you share, how much you share. So you don't have to share all courses. You don't have to share all categories on the template. You don't have to share all of the reports and analytics. So you get to set that context. So if that's something you're interested in, again, at the end of the presentation, we'll have our contact info and we can post that into the chat as well. Get in touch with us because we would be more than happy to discuss getting that set up for you all if you're interested in that. And it really does go to connect the value of the curriculum, not just within the classroom between the instructor and learner, but beyond that and into the broader community and to really, like I said, showcase what is a lot of work and what you should be very proud of.
Well, and I think other people had mentioned reapproval, getting in there and updating their curriculum for reapproval. I had a teacher just ask me out of a CTE program, he's like, when I print this out for my reapproval, it's like 20 pages. So that's why so many schools have opted to go with this public site that they share with their reapproval agency. There's ways to do it where I can just only share with them instead of everyone in the broad wide world. So there's ways to make this digital and take that weight off of all the things that have to be pulled together for certain things. So we're big fans of finding all the reasons to use your curriculum in a variety of ways so you're not replicating things when you don't have to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Time is so important.
So we are speaking of time, I'm just going to jump in very briefly into Atlas, just to show for some of you who don't know Atlas, as well as for some of you who do know and use Atlas, just a couple of the new features. It's really just a very brief overview. So just for those who need the context that maybe aren't familiar with Atlas, it's an online platform for documenting, analyzing, reviewing curriculum. It allows for multitude of different processes, whether that's central committees who write curriculum and then it's dispersed out to teachers, or whether teachers are actually involved in that curriculum writing process. I'm going to go into a medical assisting career and tech course that we have here in our sample PD site. When a teacher is working or a curriculum writer is starting to work on their curriculum, they have a course catalog, or excuse me, course calendar, unit calendar. Sorry, clearly I need more coffee. A unit calendar that is where they can build out and sequence the various units of instruction that are occurring throughout the year. This is a really important piece. It's something that I think a lot of educators are pretty used to in terms of building out their sequencing and kind of the pacing calendar. But this allows for a lot of flexibility where I can create new units. I can color code those units. So maybe we've got some units that were actually in the field or they're hands-on. Some are more conceptual. Some are more student-driven and self-paced. So we can color code those. You also have the opportunity to kind of move those around throughout the year. So if you take a little bit longer on this unit or a little bit shorter, or you need to move the sequencing around, it's meant to be flexible and adaptive. And then once the instructor or the curriculum writer is ready, they can simply click into the unit. And this is where a lot of the customization occurs. So the template we're looking at now is very different from some of the other templates that are used if we're thinking about kind of UBD or backwards design or whether that language is even relevant. But it's quite a bit of customization that occurs in the planner. So for those who have Atlas, if you're looking at your units and looking at your planners, I'll pull up on another site just kind of what some other options might look like. Here, this will be a good one to just kind of collapse here. Looking at these categories and the different ways or boxes that we capture the different elements of our curriculum. If you have Atlas, we can make modifications to that template so that it is up to date and relevant to what you're talking about. And if you're interested in Atlas and you already have a template that you use, we would want to make sure that we're trying to replicate that format as much as possible. We don't want to kind of force a process or force a way of doing things. We want to help support you in the process you have and reach the goals that you might have. So on here, we looked a little bit at the standards piece, but basically as an educator is working through, they would be choosing which standards they want to actually use within, and I won't actually keep these checked off, but they'll look at the standards that are available. These might be both academic kind of Common Core standards as well as CTE standards, and they start to align to these within their curriculum. And you can notice I get immediate feedback here telling me how many other times within this program or within this course has this particular standard been targeted. How many times is it being assessed? And then there are some really powerful tools on the back end where we can look at entire programs or entire subject areas or courses for making sure that we are hitting the standards that we need to. And if we're leaving standards out, that those are intentional and part of our process and not accidental. Cancel that. The other element here is, as Kelby kind of mentioned, unpacking those pieces into our different skill sets. So taking the standards and starting to unpack those into different areas, attaching supporting resources and activities. So there's a lot of ways that you can embed and enrich this curriculum map by linking to other supporting documents and resources. And then recently, we also added the option of adding lesson plans to these. So where we look at these multi-week, often multi-week unit level, we now also have the ability to add lesson plans in there. So this is something I want to show because I think it might be new to even some of those that use Atlas. But under my first aid medical emergencies unit here, I wanted to add a new lesson on IFAC and equipment. And we'll say that this lesson is going to be on Thursday, and it's just going to be a one-day lesson. If I wanted to add other editors to this lesson, I could, or this could just be my own lesson. So even if we teach this course, I teach this course with a colleague, or they have a section that they teach and then I teach this one, we can either work independently on our learning experiences or we can work collaboratively. Once I've got that, I'll save it. It will then show me the standards that I've selected in the previous unit. So in this case, I selected some Common Core standards that were part of the academic instruction here. So I can just check these pieces off, pull those into my lesson here. And then I have a big free text area where I can start typing out the details, or either myself or the BOCES or district can create templates. And I can simply go through and figure out which template it is I want to use, grab that and insert that in. And then that will allow me to fill in whatever that lesson planning template is. So if there's a common lesson plan that you use, that can be built in as an option for the curriculum writers or the teachers to utilize. Again, an area to add attachments here. So if you've got handouts or resources that are used with this lesson, those can be attached right away. And then a lot of our districts have really found it helpful under the actions button here. If we have a lesson plan review process or protocol, so if I needed to have my educators submit any of their lessons for review, there's a way to do that right through the system. It will then ping the person they submit it to. They can go in, they can see what's been written. If it's not quite up to snuff or there's a couple questions there, we can add comments here so they can be private or public, and I can ask questions, maybe ask that teacher or that instructor to make some changes or adjustments. And then once they're done, I would approve this lesson, and then it will show up as an approved lesson. So there are lots of processes that can be supported in this. If any of you use Google Classroom, these lessons can also be exported into Google Classroom so that they show up there. But lots of opportunities for taking that multi-week unit that is more conceptually based and kind of using multiple days and breaking that into those discrete learning experiences of, period 6 on Tuesday, or that flex multi-period that Kelby was talking about with some of her daughter's courses, how we actually break up the time that we have the students. But again, it is based on that strong foundation of that unit plan that it's coming from. Any questions or anything coming through the chat, Kelby? Anything you would add here with this?
No, just asking some specific, answering some specific questions over here. One thing, if you go back to the template real quick, one thing I'd like to point.
The CTE template, maybe?
Yeah, one thing I'd like to point out, back to Paul's example of employability skills, if those are something separate and they're like items that work like a standard, you can have the standards but also have another box that has those employability skills pop out into each of the unit templates, which can be really nice. So there's just different ways to look at that information. And, this is where Chris and I enjoy sitting down and having a conversation. So if you're like, some of this sounds interesting, feel free to let us know. We'd be happy to have a conversation and just walk through what makes the most sense for you to capture and how to capture it.
Absolutely. And I mentioned some of the analytics and the reports. We won't have time to get deep into that, but for Kelby's point of, with those employability skills or with any of the academic standards, there are really robust tools that we can use in here to just analyze our coverage. So this again is sort of a sample site. So I'll pull in my Common Core literacy within high school so we can use that as an example here. But basically what we have in this sample site is, of all of those different standards that are written for, say, our 6 through 8 literacy in history, social studies, science, and technical subjects from the Common Core, there are 48 standards, and our curriculum aligns to 39 of those. So I can click on that 39 and see what the standards are that we are aligning to, where, how frequently. I can also click on the white part of the progress bar and see, what are we leaving out? And maybe we've decided those are not the responsibility for the CTE program. That's the responsibility for the homeschool. And you can also do the same thing with the assessments. With these filters, I could look at this. If I've got a high school that has CTE and traditional academics, I could look at this across an entire grade level, but include both CTE and our ELA and history and science and social studies classes, or I can segment those out and see what are we covering in CTE versus the traditionally academic subjects and vice versa. So there are a lot of ways that we can pull that together. You can then also build that out into different pie charts and kind of see which subject areas are covering these different sets of standards and things. So there's a lot that you can do. Again, I'm just kind of going through this really quickly. Hopefully it's piquing some interest for folks, whether you use Atlas or not, of diving deeper into what is this data and how do we use it to drive that curriculum process. So for Paul's point of all those new teachers coming in next year and thinking about what changes we might want to make to our curriculum, that would be a great time to pull us into the conversation so we can showcase a couple of these tools to help drive that conversation and make sure that we are moving in the right direction and supporting it with smart, actionable data. All right, I'll pause again for questions. We're starting to get towards the end. We want to make sure that if there are questions, we answer those.
None coming through right now, Chris.
All right. Well, I'll head back into the, I don't want to start from the beginning. Let's see. There we go. But one thing that we do want to mention, if you're interested in just kind of taking a look, Atlas aside as a software, we do have professional development and work that we do, whether the schools or districts use Atlas or not, but especially if schools do use Atlas, we use the tool itself as kind of the basis for those conversations, but it is much more about best practices, pedagogy, kind of thinking about the process. Kelly mentioned earlier before that the how or the what is really critical. So who designs that curriculum, what those expectations are, where our goals are headed, all of that is part of some of the PD that we do. And we do both virtual, and now we're starting to get back on site again. I know Kelby's team is actually really eager to get on site and stop staring at Zoom screens, but actually get to interact in person with people. So we're looking forward to that as well. But take a look at what we offer and what we have. We'd be happy to support any process. I know that Actia has quite a bit as well. So obviously, you know, with any overlap, we don't want to step on any of the toes there with Actia. But if there are areas that we can help bolster or support some of the resources and professional learning that's already going on within those really strong networks there, we want to make sure that we're doing so. So feel free to take a look at our onatlas.com/PD site. We also have a blog on there with quite a bit. As I mentioned, we'll be presenting at a conference here in Oregon mid-April, and it's very likely that material will kind of turn into a blog or some other resource at some point. But there's lots of really cool resources. Sometimes they're not even from us. We've got webinars and things that educators are doing and showcasing what they're doing. So you're not just having to listen to Kelby and I, but you're actually can hear from people who are in the trenches and working at a day-to-day level with students and with educators. And really that kind of brings us to the end. So we've still, I guess, got 2-3 minutes for questions. Kelby and I are happy to stick around if there's any lingering questions, but our contact information is also there. We'd love to hear from you. If there's anything that we said today that kind of sparked something for you or you wanted to learn more, definitely reach out. We would love to continue on the conversation, but we really appreciate everybody's time today. You all are doing some cool work, and it's fun to have a couple faces and BOCES that we recognize and whatnot. But it's also awesome to see some new people in here. So thank you so much for your time today. And we'll stick around for a couple minutes.
Great. Thank you, Chris and Kelby. That was awesome. So certainly appreciate it very much. Everybody, thank you for joining us today. And they have their information there in the chat, so please utilize it. And other than that, if there are no other questions, I hope everyone has a great rest of the day. And again, Chris and Kelby, thank you very much.
Thank you. Hopefully the storms are past and you get nice spring weather on the East Coast.
We hope so.
Thanks everybody. Yeah, good to see folks. I'm catching up on the chat here, so good to see some familiar names and faces on here. Really, really awesome opportunity. All right.
All right. I think that's it.
Cool.
All right. Enjoy.
Thank you, John. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, guys. Good meeting you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Kelby.
Yeah, thank you. Have a wonderful day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jamie.
See you soon, John.
All right. Take care.